The phone screamed through the Vermont silence at 3:17 a.m., jolting Dr. Rebecca Martinez from dreams of dusty manuscripts and her father's weathered hands. Her trembling fingers found the receiver in the darkness. "Dr. Martinez." The voice crackled across continents, thick with an Ethiopian accent and something else, terror. "My name is Brother Michael Thompson. I'm calling from Debris Libanos Monastery. We found something. Something with your father's name." Rebecca's blood turned to ice. Her father had been dead 10 years. "What are you talking about?" she whispered, gripping the phone until her knuckles went white. "An ancient manuscript, hidden in the monastery walls. Your father's handwriting is in the margins. But Dr. Martinez—" The monk's voice dropped to a frightened whisper. "Brother Samuel found it 3 days ago. Tonight. He's dead." The line crackled with static and distant thunder. "Your father died protecting this secret," the voice continued. "Urgent now. The manuscript. It reveals where Jesus spent those 18 missing years. Everything the church has hidden." The line went dead. Rebecca stared at the silent phone, her heart hammering against her ribs. Outside, lightning split the Vermont sky, illuminating the cross on her father's old desk, the same cross he'd clutched the night he died in that suspicious car accident, mumbling about ancient truths that would change everything. Now someone half a world away was dead for the same secret. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Dr. Rebecca Martinez had built her life on facts, not faith. At 45, she commanded respect in Harvard's theology department, her lectures on ancient manuscripts drawing packed auditoriums. Students admired her sharp intellect and scholarly precision, never suspecting the hollow ache that had consumed her since that rainy October night 10 years ago. Her father, Thomas Martinez, had been the small-town pastor of St. Mary's in Millfield, Vermont, a gentle man who spoke of God's love with the conviction of someone who'd touched the divine. Rebecca had inherited his passion for ancient texts, but not his unwavering faith. That died with him on Route 108, his Buick wrapped around an oak tree, a briefcase full of theological research scattered across the asphalt like fallen leaves. The official report called it an accident. Rebecca knew better. Her father had been different those final months. Secretive, spending long hours in his study poring over photocopied manuscripts in languages she couldn't identify. He'd muttered about hidden truths and what they don't want us to know, his eyes holding a mixture of excitement and fear that kept her awake at night. Professor David Chen knocked on her office door at Harvard later that morning, his concerned expression masking something she couldn't quite read. At 50, David possessed the kind of understated handsomeness that came with academic success, silver threading through his dark hair, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He'd been pursuing her quietly for months, though she'd kept him at arm's length. "Rebecca, you look terrible," he said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "What's wrong?" She told him about the midnight call, watching his expression shift from concern to something harder to define. When she finished, he leaned forward, his voice gentle but insistent. "You can't be serious about going to Ethiopia. It's dangerous, remote monasteries, political instability, and chasing after some phantom connection to your father." He shook his head. "It's been 10 years, Rebecca. Maybe it's time to let the past rest." But Rebecca's mind was already made up. She'd spent a decade running from her father's shadow, from the questions that haunted her dreams. Now someone had died for the same secret that killed him. "I'm going, David," she said quietly. "I need to know what my father died protecting." David's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Then I'm funding the trip. You're not going alone." Something in his tone made her skin crawl, though she couldn't say why. The Ethiopian highlands stretched endlessly beyond the jeep's dusty windshield, a landscape that seemed carved from ancient dreams and forgotten prayers. Rebecca's hands ached from gripping the door handle as their driver navigated hairpin turns that dropped into mist-shrouded valleys thousands of feet below. 2 days of travel had brought her from Harvard's ivy-covered halls to this primordial wilderness where time felt suspended. Debre Libanos Monastery emerged from the morning fog like a vision from another century. Stone walls blackened by centuries of weather rose from a rocky outcrop, their surfaces carved with crosses and symbols that predated written history. The compound sprawled across multiple levels, connected by worn stone steps that countless pilgrims had climbed in search of divine truth. Brother Michael Thompson waited in the courtyard, and Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. He was tall and lean, weathered by decades of mountain sun, with prematurely gray hair and eyes the color of storm clouds. There was something achingly familiar about his face that made her chest tighten with inexplicable grief. "Dr. Martinez," he said, his American accent jarring in this ancient place. "Thank you for coming. I know this must be difficult." His handshake lingered a moment too long, his fingers trembling almost imperceptibly. Rebecca studied his face, searching for the source of that strange recognition. "You said you knew my father," she said carefully. Something flickered in his eyes, pain, perhaps, or regret. "Father Thomas he was a remarkable man. His research into early Christian texts was groundbreaking, revolutionary, even." He led her through corridors lined with faded frescoes depicting saints and angels, their painted eyes seeming to follow her passage. The monastery felt alive somehow, as if the stones themselves held memories of countless prayers and whispered confessions. The manuscript waited in the scriptorium, displayed on a wooden lectern beneath a shaft of dusty sunlight. The parchment was ancient, its edges cracked and yellowed, covered in Ge'ez script that flowed across the pages like frozen music. But it was the marginal notes that made Rebecca's knees weak, her father's familiar handwriting in blue ink, cramped and urgent. The title translates roughly as "The Hidden Years of the Nazarene," Brother Michael explained, his voice barely above a whisper. "It claims to document Jesus' life from age 12 to 30, the years the canonical Gospels skip entirely." Rebecca leaned closer, her fingers hovering over the ancient text. Her father's notes were scattered throughout the margins. "Confirms the Eastern influence in one place. This changes everything in another." On the final page, in handwriting that grew increasingly shaky, he'd written, "They know I'm close. God forgive me. I should have told Rebecca. The truth is worth dying for." "Where did you find this?" she whispered. "Brother Samuel discovered it 3 days ago, hidden behind a false wall in the ancient library. He was excited, agitated. He kept saying it would shake the foundations of Christianity itself." Brother Michael's voice cracked. "That night, I found him in his cell. No wounds, no signs of struggle. He simply stopped breathing. A chill ran down Rebecca's spine that had nothing to do with the mountain air. You think someone killed him? Brother Samuel was 73 and healthy as a mountain goat. He'd climbed to the hermitage just that morning. His eyes met hers, and she saw fear there, deep, bone-chilling fear. And there's something else. Yesterday, 3 men in expensive suits arrived asking about Western scholars who'd visited the monastery. They claimed to be from a historical preservation society. The ancient stones seemed to press closer around them, and Rebecca felt the weight of centuries bearing down on her shoulders. Whatever secret had killed her father was still claiming lives, still hunting those who dared to uncover the truth. Outside, the wind began to howl through the monastery walls, carrying with it the whispered warnings of the dead. The revelation came in the monastery's candlelit chapel, where shadows danced across ancient frescoes like restless spirits. Rebecca knelt beside Brother Michael as he traced his finger along a passage in the manuscript, translating the Ge'ez script in a voice that trembled with emotion. "Listen to this," he whispered. "It speaks of the young Nazarene traveling eastward, learning from teachers in distant lands, the wisdom of Buddha, the philosophy of Lao Tzu, the mysteries of the Egyptian priests, all woven into his understanding before he returned to begin his ministry." Rebecca's breath caught. "That's impossible. The Church would never. The Church has suppressed this knowledge for 2 millennia. Brother Michael interrupted, his voice growing stronger. "Because it threatens everything they've built their power upon. If Jesus learned from other traditions, if his message was truly universal rather than exclusively Christian, then what becomes of religious hierarchy? What happens to the claim that Christianity is the only path to salvation?" He turned to face her fully, and in the flickering candlelight, Rebecca saw something in his features that made her heart stop. The shape of his jaw, the set of his eyes, the way his left eyebrow curved slightly higher than the right, details burned into her memory from childhood photographs. "You're not just Brother Michael Thompson," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind howling through the stone corridors. "You're Mark. You're my brother, Mark." The silence that followed felt like a held breath, pregnant with 20 years of deception and grief. Mark, she could barely think the name, closed his eyes, as if in physical pain. "I died in that military training accident in 1994, he said finally. "Officially. My unit was told I was killed when our transport helicopter went down in a training exercise. But I survived. Rebecca, I survived and discovered I'd stumbled into something much bigger than a routine military operation." Rebecca's hands shook as the pieces fell into place. "The organization hunting the manuscript. They call themselves the custodians of sacred truth. Powerful people, Vatican officials, government leaders, wealthy industrialists who profit from religious division. They've spent centuries hiding evidence that might unite rather than divide humanity's spiritual traditions." Mark's voice grew bitter. "I learned too much about their operations. They gave me a choice: disappear forever, or watch my family pay the price." "So you let us mourn you," Rebecca said, anger and anguish warring in her chest. "Mom cried herself sick for months. Dad never got over losing his son. And I—" Her voice broke. "I blamed myself for not being a better sister, for not preventing your death somehow." Mark reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "I've lived with that guilt every day for 20 years. I thought if I could save you, if I could warn you about what Dad had discovered, maybe I could finally make amends. Dad knew, didn't he, that you were alive? In his final months, yes, I sent him coded messages through intermediaries, tried to warn him that the custodians were closing in on his research. But Thomas Martinez was too stubborn, too convinced that the truth needed to be revealed." Mark's voice cracked with emotion. "The car accident wasn't an accident. Rebecca, they killed our father because he wouldn't abandon his work." The chapel seemed to spin around her. Everything she'd believed about her family, about her father's death, about her own life, all of it built on lies and manipulation. The grief she'd carried, the guilt that had driven her from faith to cold academia, the hollow ache that had defined her adult life, it had all been orchestrated by people who traded in secrets and blood. "The manuscript," she managed to say. "Is it real?" Mark's expression grew complicated. "That's what we need to determine." "But, Rebecca, there's something else. Professor Chen, your colleague who funded this trip, I've seen his photograph in custodian intelligence files. He's not here to help you. He's here to clean up the loose ends." As if summoned by their conversation, footsteps echoed in the corridor beyond the chapel. Heavy, purposeful footsteps that didn't belong to the soft-soled sandals of the monks. "They've found us," Mark whispered, blowing out the candles. In the sudden darkness, Rebecca heard her brother's voice one more time. "Whatever happens next, know that I never stopped loving you. And Dad, he died protecting something worth dying for." The footsteps were at the chapel door now, and Rebecca realized her nightmare was just beginning. The next 4 days blurred together in a haze of candlelight, ancient parchment, and whispered translations that felt like blasphemy in the sacred silence of the monastery. Rebecca and Mark worked feverishly in the hidden chamber beneath the scriptorium, accessible only through a narrow passage that Brother Samuel had discovered in his final days. The musty air tasted of centuries and secrets, heavy with the weight of knowledge that had been buried for nearly 2,000 years. Mark's fingers traced the delicate Ge'ez script as he translated passages that made Rebecca's academic mind real. "Here," he whispered, pointing to a section near the middle of the manuscript. "It describes the young Nazarene's journey to the east, to lands beyond the Roman Empire's reach. Listen to this. In the 17th year of his life, the teacher-to-be walked among the wise men of the mountain monasteries, where the Buddha's words still echoed in the thin air." Rebecca leaned closer. Her father's reading glasses perched on her nose. She'd found them tucked inside the manuscript's protective case, along with his worn leather journal. The journal's pages were filled with his careful research notes, cross-references to other ancient texts, and increasingly frantic observations about being watched. "Dad wrote here that he'd found corroborating evidence in the Tibetan archives," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Documents that speak of a young Jewish teacher who spent years learning meditation practices and Buddhist philosophy before returning to his homeland." Mark nodded grimly. "And look at this section. It mentions his time with Egyptian priests, learning the mystery traditions that predated Christianity by millennia. If this manuscript is authentic, it proves that Jesus' teachings weren't revolutionary in isolation. They were a synthesis, a bringing together of humanity's greatest spiritual insights." The implications hung heavy in the underground chamber. Rebecca had spent her academic career studying early Christianity, analyzing the theological foundations that had shaped Western civilization for 2,000 years. Everything she'd been taught, everything she'd taught others, suddenly seemed like elaborate fiction designed to obscure a more profound truth. "No wonder they killed Dad," she said, her fingers trembling as she turned the ancient pages. "This doesn't just challenge Christian orthodoxy. It obliterates the entire foundation of religious exclusivity. If Jesus learned from multiple traditions, if his message was truly universal, then every war fought in the name of religious supremacy, every crusade, every persecution, was built on a lie designed to maintain power." Mark finished. "The custodians have spent centuries ensuring that humanity's spiritual traditions remain divided, competing, suspicious of each other. Unity of religious thought would threaten every power structure they've built." Above them, the monastery continued its ancient rhythms. They could hear the monks chanting their evening prayers, voices rising and falling in harmonies that seemed to emerge from the very stones. But beneath the sacred routine, danger lurked. Twice they'd heard unfamiliar footsteps in the corridors above, and Brother Hale, the youngest monk, had reported strangers asking questions in the nearby village. Professor David Chen had arrived 2 days earlier, his concern for Rebecca's safety so pronounced it felt theatrical. He'd taken rooms in the monastery's guest quarters, claiming he couldn't bear to let her face this dangerous situation alone. But Rebecca noticed how his eyes lingered on the ancient texts, how his questions probed just a little too deeply into their discoveries. "I don't trust him," Mark said during one of their brief rest periods. "I've seen his face in custodian files, though I can't place exactly where or when. There's something wrong about his presence here." Rebecca wanted to defend David, but her father's journal contained troubling entries from his final weeks. References to a colleague who'd been asking too many questions about his research, someone who'd offered funding for his work with unusual urgency. The descriptions matched David perfectly, down to his habit of adjusting his glasses when he was being deceptive. On the 4th night, as a fierce storm lashed the highlands, they made a breakthrough that changed everything. Hidden within the manuscript's binding, Mark discovered a sealed pocket containing a fragment of much older parchment Greek text in a hand that made Rebecca's scholarly heart race. "This is 1st century," she breathed, her expert eye immediately recognizing the distinctive letter forms. "Mark, this isn't medieval gaze. This is contemporary with the gospel writers themselves." The Greek fragment was brief but electrifying. "I, Thomas, called Didymus, bear witness to these words spoken by my master upon his return from the lands of the dawn. What I have learned among the children of the East," said he, "confirms the truth that burns within all sincere seekers. The divine light shines through many windows, yet illuminates the same eternal room." Rebecca's hands shook as she photographed the fragment with her digital camera, the flash seeming sacrilegious in the ancient chamber. "Thomas the Apostle," she whispered. "Doubting Thomas. If this is authentic, it's a direct testimony from one of Jesus's 12 disciples." Mark's expression was grim as he studied their father's journal. "Dad suspected this fragment existed. Look at this entry from 2 weeks before he died. The smoking gun may be hidden within the Ethiopian text. If my theories are correct, Thomas preserved the secret that the others agreed to bury." "God help me," I'm so close to proving it. The storm above grew more violent, lightning illuminating the narrow window slits of their underground sanctuary. In the intermittent flashes, Rebecca caught glimpses of her brother's face, older now, marked by 20 years of exile and guilt, but still recognizably the boy who'd taught her to ride a bicycle and defended her from playground bullies. "Why did you really become a monk?" she asked during a quiet moment. Mark's smile was sad and complicated. "Because I needed to understand what Dad died for. Because I hoped that somewhere in these ancient walls I might find the faith I lost when I discovered how evil people can be in the name of protecting good." He gestured at the manuscript spread before them. "Maybe I found it. Maybe the real Christianity was always meant to be what this document describes, a bridge between all of humanity's attempts to touch the divine." Their conversation was interrupted by a sound that froze their blood, heavy footsteps in the corridor above, moving with military precision. Not the sandaled shuffle of monks, but the deliberate tread of men who carried weapons and came with dark purpose. "They've found us," Mark whispered, quickly gathering the most important photographs and documents into a waterproof pouch. "Rebecca, listen to me carefully. There's a passage behind that stone. It leads to caves that connect with the old hermitage on the ridge. If something happens to me, you take these documents and get them to the outside world." "Mark, no." "I've had 20 years to prepare for this moment," he said, pressing the pouch into her hands. "Dad died protecting this truth. I won't let his sacrifice be meaningless." The footsteps had stopped directly above them, and they could hear voices, English voices, speaking in the clipped tones of military professionals. Through the ancient stones, Rebecca caught fragments of conversation that confirmed her worst fears, confirmed their location. "Chen has been monitoring the situation. Eliminate all witnesses." Mark's face had gone pale in the candlelight. "David Chen isn't just working with them," he whispered. "He's leading them." The sound of stone grinding against stone echoed through their chamber as someone began forcing open the hidden entrance to their sanctuary. In moments, their refuge would be breached. And Rebecca realized with crystalline clarity that her childhood was truly dead, along with every illusion she'd clung to about safety. Trust, and the possibility that some people might actually be what they seemed. The last candle flickered and died, plunging them into absolute darkness just as the first armed figure dropped into their ancient hiding place. The muzzle flash lit up the underground chamber like lightning, and Rebecca's scream echoed off ancient stones as Mark threw himself between her and the armed intruder. The bullet meant for her chest tore through her brother's shoulder instead, spinning him backward into the manuscript table with a sickening crack. "Alive!" David Chen's voice cut through the chaos from above. "I need her alive." More men rappelled into the chamber, 3 of them, moving with the practiced efficiency of special operations veterans. Their tactical gear gleamed dully in the emergency lighting they'd brought, turning the sacred space into a war zone. Rebecca pressed herself against the far wall, Mark's blood warm on her hands as she tried to staunch the wound in his shoulder. "Hello? Rebecca?" David's voice was different now, colder, stripped of the gentle academic facade he'd worn for months. He descended into the chamber with careful precision, his expensive suit replaced by black tactical clothing that made him look like a stranger. "I'm sorry it had to come to this, but you've made things very complicated." "You bastard," she whispered, her voice raw with rage and terror. "You killed my father. You've been lying to me for months." David's expression remained professionally neutral, though something flickered in his eyes, regret, perhaps, or the ghost of genuine feeling. "Your father was a brilliant man, Rebecca. Stubborn, but brilliant. We offered him everything: funding, prestige, a chance to shape how his discoveries were revealed to the world. He chose martyrdom instead." Mark groaned, trying to push himself upright against the stone wall. Blood seeped between his fingers where he clutched his wounded shoulder. "The manuscript," he gasped. "Don't let them—" One of the tactical team stepped forward and drove his boot into Mark's ribs, cutting off his words with a wet cough. Rebecca lunged toward her brother, but David caught her arm with surprising strength. "The manuscript is a fascinating piece of work," David said conversationally, as if they were discussing it over coffee in his Harvard office. "Medieval forgery, of course, but expertly crafted. The kind of thing that could cause tremendous damage in the wrong hands." "You're lying," Rebecca said through gritted teeth. "The Greek fragment, it's 1st century. I can prove it." David's smile was genuinely sad now. "Oh, Rebecca. Always the scholar. Always so eager to believe in the next great discovery. The fragment is real. I'll grant you that. Thomas did write those words. But he was describing a fever dream, the hallucinations of a dying man who'd contracted some tropical disease during his missionary journeys to India." He gestured to one of his men, who began carefully photographing the manuscript and its scattered pages. "The Church has known about Thomas's account for centuries. It's safely stored in the Vatican's secret archives, along with dozens of other documents that paint Jesus as everything from a political revolutionary to a mystical philosopher. Fascinating reading, but hardly the foundation for revealed truth." Mark struggled to speak, blood flecking his lips. "Then why kill for it? Because people like your father refuse to understand the bigger picture," David replied. "Do you have any idea what would happen if this manuscript became public? If every Christian on earth suddenly believed that their Savior learned from Buddha, from Hindu mystics, from Egyptian priests, the chaos would be unimaginable." Rebecca stared at him in horror. "So you suppress the truth to maintain order?" "I preserve civilization," David said sharply. "The custodians have prevented 17 religious wars in the last century alone. We've stopped 3 potential crusades, dismantled 4 apocalyptic cults, and kept the nuclear powers from using theological differences as justification for mutual annihilation. The truth is a luxury humanity can't afford." The wind howled through the monastery above, carrying with it the sound of distant sirens. Rebecca felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps the local authorities had been alerted to the gunfire, but David's expression remained calm. "Local police," he explained, checking his watch. "They'll find evidence of a tragic accident. Unstable monastery walls collapsed during the storm, unfortunately trapping Dr. Rebecca Martinez and her guide while they were exploring the historical ruins. By the time rescue workers reach this chamber, there won't be enough left to identify." One of his men was setting charges along the chamber's support pillars, working with the methodical care of someone who'd demolished buildings before. Rebecca realized with crystal clarity that she was looking at her own death, watching professionals prepare to bury her alive in this ancient tomb. "The charges will bring down this entire section of the monastery." David continued. "Tragic. But these old buildings are notoriously unstable. The manuscript will be destroyed in the collapse, of course." another priceless artifact lost to the ravages of time and weather. Mark tried once more to rise, his face gray with pain and blood loss. "Rebecca," he whispered. "The passage behind the carved stone." David's head snapped toward the far wall, his eyes finding the nearly invisible seam in the carved stonework that marked the hidden exit. His expression darkened. "Search her," he ordered his men. "Every pocket, every hiding place. Find whatever documents they photographed." Rough hands seized Rebecca, patting her down with professional thoroughness. They found her camera, her phone, the waterproof pouch Mark had given her containing their most important discoveries. David examined each item carefully before passing them to his demolitions expert. "Everything burns," he said simply. Rebecca watched her father's life work disappear into a canvas bag destined for incineration. 20 years of research, proof of humanity's shared spiritual heritage, evidence that might have brought the world's religions together instead of driving them apart, all of it reduced to leverage in a game played by men who confused power with wisdom. "You want to know the real tragedy," David said, his voice almost gentle now. "Your father was right. Jesus probably did learn from other traditions. The early church probably did suppress evidence of Christianity's diverse roots. And if that knowledge had emerged naturally, gradually, over centuries of careful scholarship, it might have done tremendous good." He knelt beside her, his face inches from hers. "But your father wanted to detonate that truth like a bomb. He would have published everything at once, without context or preparation. Can you imagine the riots, the wars, the collapse of institutions that billions of people depend on for meaning and hope? The charges were set now, red digital displays showing 5 minutes on their countdown timers. David's men were already moving toward the chamber's entrance, their mission nearly complete. "Goodbye, Rebecca," David said, and for a moment she heard an echo of the man she'd thought she knew. "I genuinely wish it could have ended differently." Then he was gone, climbing toward the surface with his team, leaving Rebecca and Mark alone in the flickering light of the countdown timers. 5 minutes to live. 5 minutes to somehow escape a tomb that had been designed by experts to ensure no escape was possible. Mark's breathing was growing shallow, but his eyes blazed with desperate determination. "The passage," he gasped. "Now!" The countdown timers cast hellish red shadows on the chamber walls as Rebecca dragged her wounded brother toward the hidden passage. 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Mark's weight seemed to double with each step, his blood leaving a dark trail across the ancient stones that had witnessed centuries of prayer and now bore witness to impending murder. "I can't," Mark gasped, his legs buckling as they reached the carved stone that concealed their only escape route. "Rebecca, leave me. Take the passage and run." "Shut up," she snarled, pressing her shoulder against the stone mechanism. The passage had been sealed for decades, its edges crusted with accumulated debris and mineral deposits. Her academic hands, soft from years of handling delicate manuscripts, scraped raw against the unforgiving rock. "I'm not losing you again." 4 minutes. The stone groaned but didn't budge. Rebecca threw her full weight against it, desperation lending strength to muscles that had never been tested beyond carrying heavy books. Behind them, the digital displays pulsed their relentless countdown, each second bringing them closer to being entombed forever in this underground sanctuary. "Rebecca." Mark's voice was weaker now, his face pale as parchment. "Listen to me. The truth about Dad, about the manuscript, it can't die here. Promise me you'll tell the world what we found. Promise me you'll shut up and help me move this damn stone." She shot back, tears streaming down her dust-covered face. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was fighting to save the brother she'd mourned for 20 years, only to watch him die again in the same moment she'd found him. 3 minutes and 20 seconds. Something gave way with a grinding crack that echoed like thunder in the confined space. The stone pivoted on its ancient mechanism, revealing a narrow passage that disappeared into absolute darkness. Stale air rushed out, carrying the scent of centuries and the faint promise of freedom. Rebecca grabbed Mark under his good arm, hauling him toward the opening. He was dead weight now, his consciousness fading from blood loss and shock. She could hear his breathing growing more labored, could feel his body temperature dropping as life leaked out of him. "Stay with me," she whispered, dragging him into the passage. The space was barely wide enough for her shoulders, carved from living rock by monks who had valued spiritual isolation over comfort. Behind them, the red glow of the countdown timers painted the chamber walls like blood, 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The passage curved sharply upward, following some ancient geological fault in the mountain. Rebecca's knees scraped against sharp stones, her hands torn and bleeding from hauling Mark's weight up the treacherous incline. Every few yards, she had to stop and check if he was still breathing, her heart stopping each time until she felt the faint whisper of air from his nostrils. "Dad would be proud," Mark mumbled during one of her rest stops, his words barely coherent. His little girl never gave up on anything. "Dad's little girl is about to kick your ass if you don't stop talking and concentrate on staying alive," Rebecca replied, but her voice broke on the words. She could feel him slipping away, could sense his grip on consciousness loosening with each labored breath. 2 minutes. The passage began to level out, and Rebecca caught a faint current of fresher air. Somewhere ahead lay the outside world, if they could reach it before the charges detonated. But Mark was growing heavier with each step, his wounded body shutting down despite her desperate efforts to keep him moving. 1 minute and 30 seconds. "Rebecca." His voice was barely a whisper now. "The pouch in my robes. Dad's real research. The photographs we took. Promise me." She found the waterproof pouch tucked inside his monastic robes, her fingers sticky with his blood. Inside were memory cards, photocopies of her father's journal, and digital prints of the manuscript's most crucial passages. The real treasure, not the manuscript itself, but the proof of what it represented. 1 minute. The passage opened suddenly into a larger space, a natural cave that had been expanded by human hands centuries ago. Moonlight filtered through a crack in the cave's ceiling, painting silver lines across rough walls covered in ancient Christian symbols. They were in the old hermitage, the retreat where monks had once come to pray in absolute solitude. 30 seconds. Rebecca collapsed beside her brother, both of them gasping in the thin mountain air. Through the cave mouth, she could see the monastery below, its windows glowing warmly in the darkness. In moments, part of that ancient structure would be reduced to rubble, and the world would lose another piece of its spiritual heritage to men who confused control with wisdom. 10 seconds. Mark's hand found hers in the darkness. "Tell them," he whispered. "Tell them the truth." The explosions lit up the night like the wrath of God. The monastery's eastern wing collapsed in a thunderous roar that shook the mountain itself. Ancient stones that had stood for 8 centuries, tumbling into rubble in mere seconds. From their position in the Hermitage Cave, Rebecca watched orange flames lick at the night sky while her brother's life ebbed away in her arms. The irony was cruel. They had escaped the tomb only for Mark to die anyway, his blood pooling on stones that had once been sanctified by hermit monks seeking divine revelation. "Stay with me," she whispered, pressing her torn shirt against his shoulder wound. But she could feel the futility of her efforts. The bullet had done too much damage, and their desperate flight through the passage had reopened the wound beyond any hope of field treatment. Mark's breathing grew more shallow with each passing moment. "Rebecca," he gasped, his voice barely audible above the distant sounds of emergency vehicles racing through the valley below. "The manuscript, It was never about the manuscript." She leaned closer, her ear nearly touching his lips. "What do you mean? The real secret. Dad found it, not in the Ethiopian text. Each word cost him tremendous effort. Hidden in plain sight, in his own church, in Millfield." Rebecca's heart clenched. "Mark, you're not making sense. Rest now. Help will come." But his grip on her hand tightened with surprising strength. "The church records. Baptismal registry from 1847. Family named Chen. David's great-great-grandfather. He was the one who hid the original documents." The pieces clicked together in Rebecca's mind with sickening clarity. David Chen's family had been in Vermont for over a century and a half, long enough to establish deep roots in the community, long enough to be trusted with the kind of secrets that small New England churches sometimes harbored. "David's ancestor was a custodian," she whispered. Mark nodded weakly. The Chen family, guardians of the real treasure. For 5 generations, David thought it was still hidden in Dad's church. That's why he got close to you, why he funded this trip, to keep you away while his people searched. Below them, the emergency vehicles had reached the monastery. Rebecca could see figures moving through the rubble, searching for survivors who would never be found. The official story was already being written: tragic accident, structural collapse during the storm, 2 American researchers killed while exploring historical ruins. But the manuscript, medieval forgery, Mark confirmed, his words growing fainter. "Just like David said, but it served its purpose, drew the custodians here, away from the real prize. Dad was so clever. Let them think they knew what he'd found." Rebecca stared at her dying brother in amazement. "You're telling me that Dad staged all of this, that he wanted them to find the Ethiopian manuscript?" Mark's smile was ghost-like in the moonlight. "Dad knew they'd been watching him for months, so he fed them false information about a discovery in Ethiopia, made them think the threat was here, while the real documents remained safe in Vermont." The revelation hit her like a physical blow. Her father had sacrificed his life not to protect a medieval forgery, but to misdirect the custodians away from something infinitely more valuable. He had played a game of chess with killers, using his own death as the ultimate gambit. "What documents?" she whispered urgently. "What's hidden in the church?" But Mark's eyes were glazing over, his breathing becoming irregular. Behind the altar, loose stone, third from the left. Dad's real discovery. The proof that will change everything. His hand went limp in hers. Rebecca sat in the cave for a long time, holding her brother's body, while the rescue operation continued far below. The weight of his sacrifice pressed down on her like the mountain itself. He had lived 20 years in exile, had become Brother Michael Thompson to protect a family that thought him dead, had died saving her from a trap their father had set in motion a decade ago. But as dawn broke over the Ethiopian highlands, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Rebecca began to understand the true scope of her father's plan. The custodians believed they had won. They thought the threat had been eliminated, the dangerous researchers silenced, the problematic documents destroyed. David Chen would return to Harvard confident that the secret was safe for another generation. They would never suspect that the real treasure lay hidden in a small-town Vermont church, waiting for the right person to claim it. Rebecca carefully searched Mark's belongings, finding additional memory cards and documents that he had kept as insurance. The photographs of the Ethiopian manuscript were worthless. Now, medieval forgeries had no power to shake the foundations of faith. But Mark had also documented something else during his years at the monastery, records of other custodian operations, names and dates and bank transfers that painted a picture of a conspiracy spanning continents and centuries. More importantly, he had preserved their father's final communications-coded messages that revealed the location of the real discovery, not in ancient Ethiopia, but in modern Vermont, not in a manuscript written by strangers, but in documents that bore the signatures of America's founding fathers. As the sun climbed higher, Rebecca made her way carefully down the mountain, avoiding the search teams and official investigators. She had a cover story prepared. She had been exploring alone when the storm hit, had taken shelter in a village on the far side of the ridge, had only learned of the tragedy when she returned the next morning. David would be expecting her, would be watching for signs that she had survived with dangerous knowledge. But Rebecca had learned something from her father's example. Sometimes the best way to hide the truth was to let your enemies think they had already found it. The real battle for humanity's spiritual heritage wouldn't be fought in Ethiopian monasteries or Vatican archives. It would be decided in a small New England church, where a country pastor had hidden documents that could unite the world's faiths or tear them apart forever. Rebecca boarded the plane to America carrying nothing but her grief and her brother's final gift, the knowledge of where the real treasure lay hidden. 6 months after Mark's death in the Ethiopian highlands, Rebecca Martinez stood in the sanctuary of St. Mary's Church in Millfield, Vermont, watching the late afternoon sun stream through stained glass windows that had witnessed a century and a half of prayers, confessions, and quiet revelations. The church remained exactly as her father had left it, hymnals arranged with military precision, altar cloth pressed and spotless, the faint scent of old wood and candle wax creating an atmosphere of timeless peace. David Chen had been arrested 3 weeks earlier, taken into custody by federal agents who had received an anonymous package containing detailed financial records, photographs, and correspondence documenting the custodian's operations across 5 continents. The media had portrayed it as an international conspiracy involving art theft and antiquities smuggling, which was true enough to be believable, while concealing the deeper truth about religious suppression and manufactured division. Rebecca ran her fingers along the altar rail where she had knelt as a child, listening to her father's gentle voice explaining the mysteries of faith in terms a young mind could grasp. behind the altar. The third stone from the left appeared identical to all the others, fitted perfectly, showing no signs of disturbance. But when she pressed against its edges in the precise sequence Mark had described, it shifted with a soft, grinding sound that echoed through the empty sanctuary. The hidden compartment contained a waterproof case that had protected its contents for over a decade. Inside, Rebecca found documents that made her academic heart race and her spiritual understanding expand beyond anything she had imagined possible. Letters from Thomas Jefferson discussing the universal principles underlying all religious traditions. Correspondence between Benjamin Franklin and religious leaders from multiple faiths, exploring the common threads that bound humanity's spiritual seeking. Most remarkably, a collection of testimonials from early American Christians, Jews, Muslims, and Native Americans who had found ways to honor their distinct traditions while recognizing the divine spark that illuminated them all. These weren't ancient manuscripts or medieval forgeries. They were American documents, written by the nation's founders and preserved by congregations who understood that religious liberty meant more than the freedom to practice one faith. It meant the wisdom to see truth wherever it might be found. Rebecca's hands trembled as she photographed each page. This was what the custodians had truly feared, what her father had died protecting, what Mark had spent 20 years of exile keeping safe. Not some exotic revelation from distant lands, but proof that America's spiritual heritage had always been more inclusive, more universal, more genuinely unified than the religious establishment dared acknowledge. She created digital copies, uploaded them to secure servers, and sent protected files to scholars around the world before anyone could stop her. Within hours, academic forums buzzed with discussion of the Millfield documents. Within days, religious leaders from multiple traditions were calling for interfaith dialogue based on the historical evidence of their shared values. The transformation wasn't instant, or dramatic social change never was. But seeds were planted in minds ready to receive them. Seminary students began studying comparative religion as a standard part of their training. Interfaith councils formed in communities across the country. Children grew up learning about the spiritual insights of many traditions rather than just one, understanding that diversity of practice could coexist with unity of purpose. Rebecca returned to Harvard, but her teaching had changed. She developed new courses exploring the historical connections between religious traditions. The ways faith had always transcended boundaries, even when institutions had tried to enforce them. Her classroom became a place where students from different backgrounds could discover their common ground, while honoring their distinct heritages. On quiet evenings, she would walk through Harvard Yard and think about her father and brother, about the sacrifices they had made to preserve a truth that was simultaneously ancient and urgently contemporary. The documents they had protected proved that humanity's greatest spiritual teachers had always recognized the same fundamental reality: that love was stronger than fear, that unity was more powerful than division, that the divine light shining through different windows illuminated the same eternal room. Thomas the Apostle had been right after all. His words preserved not in some exotic manuscript, but in the founding documents of a nation built on the radical idea that all people were created equal in the eyes of whatever God they chose to worship. The truth had been hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone brave enough to let it shine. Rebecca smiled, feeling her father's presence in the autumn air and her brother's blessing in the turning leaves. The battle for humanity's spiritual heritage had been won not through violence or suppression, but through the simple act of letting truth speak for itself. After all, that was what faith had always been about. My dear friends, as we reach the twilight of our lives, we often find ourselves questioning the faith that once seemed so certain, wondering if the divisions that have torn our world apart truly reflect God's will. This story speaks to every parent who has lost a child, every person who has watched their family scattered by disagreement, every heart that has ached for unity in a world determined to stay divided, like Rebecca's father. Many of us have spent decades searching for truth, only to discover that the greatest revelations often lie hidden in the most familiar places: our own churches, our own communities, our own hearts. We who remember when neighbors of different faiths still spoke to each other, who raised children in an America that seemed more hopeful, more united. We understand the pain of watching institutions we trusted betray the very love they were meant to protect. But this story reminds us that truth cannot be buried forever, that the bridges we build in love are stronger than the walls others build in fear. Our legacy isn't the divisions we inherited, but the unity we choose to leave behind. Sometimes the greatest act of faith is simply refusing to let hope die.